speaker today is the author of From Wounded Knee to the Gallows. He does have a few books over here. I'm sure they're for sale. That be glad to do that. Philip Hall and Mary Lewis are the authors. And he said, don't introduce me, but so I won't. He's going to do that. So I give you Philip.
Is that on? Okay. Well, first I have to tell you that at age 82, interesting things happen to you. Your long-term memory kind of becomes like Swiss cheese with a lot of holes in it. And unfortunately, history is all about names and dates and the very things you forget. But the next part that sort of offsets it is if you have a thought and you think it more than once, you start to believe it's true. So I filled in the holes in my Swiss cheese with my thoughts. And so what I say may not be true, but I want you to believe it anyway. Okay. We'll just pretend it's true. So I recall being in Sturgis in December 28th, 1894, and I caught the train here. It was the Elkhorn, Missouri Valley Railroad, which you just called the cowboy line. And I recognized that somebody out there also got on the train with me. But like I say, I don't think we exchanged names, and if we did, I forgot. But we went up to Deadwood. And we went up to Deadwood because Two Sticks was going to be hanged that day, and we wanted to see it. We had followed it in the newspapers for almost 2 years, that whole episode of the murder and trying to capture him and the difficulty and the trial. And so we wanted to be there for the last act. So we rode the train up to Deadwood, and along the way, somebody told us where we were headed for, what we were looking for. So when we got off the train, we started walking up the gulch, and they told us just a block, and look over to the right, and you'll see a big building made out of brick, 44 by 24. And they said, you know, it sits a little bit off the street, but if you look for it, you can't miss it. So we couldn't miss it. We got there. And I appreciated you because you were a little more assertive than I was. And so when we got to the jail, you just opened the door and walked in, and I followed you. And here's the jailer sitting there, right like he's expecting some important people. Now, I don't mean to insult you, but you weren't the important person. And certainly I wasn't. But he didn't quite know where to place us, so he just gestured to the stairs to the right, and we took the stairs and got up in the second floor, and then it was just one big room. And on the west side of this room were 6 cells, and they were occupied. There was a prisoner, if you will, in every cell. But they didn't call them cells, they called them cages, and that's what they were, just iron bars. And the room was very sparsely furnished. There was just a wood table, pretty much like this size, a wooden table, and a wooden chair on this side and a wooden chair on that side, and that was it. And looking far down this dimly lit room, because there wasn't any electricity, but there was some windows, and we saw a man standing there, and he came up and greeted us, and he said he was Father Florentine Digman, and he was a Jesuit, and he was in charge of the school at the Drexel Mission. Well, let me help you here with a minute. Drexel Mission was about 5 miles down White Clay Creek from Pine Ridge Agency, and everybody here knows where Pine Ridge Agency is. Well, so the Drexel Mission was about 5 miles down, and the White Clay Creek starts north of starts south of Pine Ridge up in the Sand Hills, and in those days it was spring-fed and flowed a good amount of water. So if you went from the Drexel Mission another 5 miles down the creek, you came to Young Man Afraid of His Horses Village. And if you went another 5 miles, you came to No Waters Village. And to give you a little orientation here, No Waters Village is where the town of Oglala is today. It just kind of morphed from the village into the town. But he said, Father Digman said that this is his third visit to Pine Ridge, or not to Pine Ridge, to Deadwood. He said the bishop ordered me to come and try to save the life of a pagan Indian from spending his entire eternity in the fires of hell and damnation. And that's what he was about. And he said he spent quite a bit of time teaching this person the tenets of Catholicism. And he finally got there. And he said, just yesterday, I baptized him into the Catholic Church under the name of John. And he said, just a few hours before you got here, I gave 2 sticks to his last rites. And at that, hearing his name, 2 sticks comes to the front of the jail cell. And we turn and we look at him. We expect to see a ferocious, big, powerful, evil-looking person. 2 sticks is about 5'5", gray hair, has aged before his time. He looks like he should be somebody's doting grandfather, not somebody who was responsible for killing 4 white men. And a little aside here to tell you about the name 2 Sticks. Most of his life, he was known as Red Elk. And about a decade before this, he had an accident that was a compound fracture of his leg. And the Indian medicine man wasn't too much of an orthopedic person. And so the leg never set well, never got set, never healed well. So for a long time, 2 Sticks went around through his world on 2 homemade crutches. And that was so long that his kinsmen started to call him 2 Sticks. He started to call himself 2 Sticks, and even in the tribal rolls, he's called 2 Sticks. But so anyway, that's the image there of why he was called 2 Sticks. Just at this moment now, we hear steps, people coming up the stairs. They're the important people. And so the first person to come up the steps is Otto P. Miller, and P is not an initial, it's his last name, P-E-E-M-I-L-L-E-R. He's the U.S. Marshal for the state of South Dakota, and he's followed by his deputy marshal, Frank Biegelmeyer, followed by the sheriff of Custer County, followed by the sheriff of Dawes County, Nebraska, followed by the official interpreter for the Pine Ridge Agency, and followed by Porter Warner, who is the reporter for the old Deadwood Daily Pioneer. And last person is the jailer. So P. Miller has just been recently in this job, and he wants to do this execution perfectly. So he quickly arranges everybody right in front of 2 Sticks' cell. The jailer opens the cell, 2 Sticks steps out, and P. Miller reads the death warrant, which basically says you were convicted in October, I think my date, I'll say October 15th. And the judge sentenced you to be hanged today, December 28th. And that's what we're here for. I'm going to give a little aside. December 28th was 1 day short of the 4th anniversary of the Wounded Knee Massacre. It was no accident he picked that date, but you say, well, why didn't he pick December 29th, which would have been the exact anniversary of the Wounded Knee Massacre? Well, in 1894, the 29th fell on a Saturday. And we all know that it's hard enough to get a state employee to work Monday through Friday without trying to get them to do extra work on Saturday. So that's why the hanging was 1 day early. But for all symbolic purposes, it was the 4th anniversary of the Wounded Knee Massacre. Well, when P. Miller gets finished, now I've never been fortunate enough to be at an execution. So I don't know if this is traditional, part of the law, but anyway, he asked if 2 Sticks had anything to say. And 2 Sticks did, had quite a bit to say. And he basically said, I'm innocent. You're hanging an innocent person. I wasn't there. I didn't do this. Well, every law person knows the penitentiary, half the people in the penitentiary are innocent. So I think they just ignored it and didn't, That's just what you say. So at that, P. Miller nods to Bigelmeyer's assistant, and the nod means go and strap his two arms behind him. And so P. Miller or Bigelmeyer comes up and grabs his left arm, pulls it behind him, grabs his right arm, and Two Sticks screams in pain. That arm's not moving. The arm's not moving because in their first attempt to arrest him, he was shot through the shoulder by an Indian policeman with a .44 caliber rifle. And the Indian medicine man kept him alive, but it didn't heal well, and the scar tissue and didn't movement in the frozen shoulder, so that shoulder's not coming back. Well, the difficulty is Bigelmeyer had a black strap with a buckle at the end and holes punched all the way down so he could strap his arms behind him. But since this arm wouldn't move, the strap was too short. So things are not off to a good start. And the jailer, now, sometimes when you write history, you have to fill in between the blanks. And I'm telling you right now, I'm filling in between the blanks. What I think happened was the jailer came up to Bigelmeyer and said, come downstairs with me. We got ropes and cords. You can find what you need. So as Bigelmeyer leaves, remember I told you about this table? I never throw in a detail that's not important. Bigelmeyer sets that black strap down on the table and follows the jailer down the stairs. Well, have to think of how uncomfortable this is. Everybody's there. They know their mission. They know what they want to do. They don't know each other. They're all strangers, one from the other. So this has to be a very uncomfortable time for these people to try to make small talk and be personable in the face of an execution. So while they're chatting, I saw you. You turn and look out the window, and lo and behold, right down below you is the gallows. It's freshly built. This is the first hanging, official or unofficial, in Deadwood. And the gallows, like I say, was recently built. The person who built it even worked on it over Christmas. And just as an aside, he was on the jury that convicted, the guy who built the gallows was on the jury that convicted Two Sticks of murder. And then we noticed the gallows is between two very tall buildings, two-story buildings. And at each end of those buildings, the carpenter had built a 20-foot high wood fence that you couldn't see through on each end. And on the end closest to us, there's a door that's open, and Chris Mathieson, you don't need to know that name. Chris Mathieson's standing there collecting tickets so people could go watch. Well, they're actually not tickets. They were passes. So anybody who had a relative or one of these four people or had a reason or was an official, they got a pass. And it was an official pass with their name on it. And Mathieson looked at it and said, oh yeah, that's you, go ahead, you're admitted. So there were 200 of these passes. But you're in the best position. You have a perfect eye view down on the gallows. So you stay right where you are. And so then this group with Two Sticks with his hands bound behind him, they all start down the stairs, and you just stay and watch, and pretty soon they come into your view. And when they get to the gallows, P. Miller starts up the steps, followed by Two Sticks, followed by Bigelmeyer, and followed by Thornton Digman. So that's the four of them climb the double thing to the top of the gallows, and P. Miller positions Two Sticks over the trapdoor and steps back off the trapdoor, and he turns to Digman, and Digman gives Two Sticks permission to sing his death song. So Two Sticks starts singing his death song, and it goes on and on and on and on. And finally, Digman realizes he's in the third version of the same song. So in Sioux, he yells at him in one word, which I think is Helena, which means enough. So Two Sticks stops. the sheriff or the U.S. Marshal then steps up, puts a cape over his head, and puts the hangman's noose around his neck. And while he's doing that, Beaglemeyer is wrapping a cord around Two Stick's legs because you don't want him flapping and going all over. You want this to be like a plumb bob dropping. And so he steps back, and then he turns to Beaglemeyer and nods his head, and that means Beaglemeyer is supposed to pull this lever that will drop the trapdoor. Oh, Beaglemeyer, he screwed up one time already on this hanging. So he's got this one right, because for a couple, he was there yesterday and he made two trial runs where he pulled that lever and saw the trapdoor drop. He knew how it worked, and he was confident. Well, he pulls the lever and it doesn't open. Well, think about it. You've got the weight and the pins that would go into a piece of metal, but now with the weight on it, they go up like that, and the hole is not big enough. Well, I need a drink at this point, and this is pure vodka. So I want you to hold that image in my mind while I quench my thirst. Here's Two Sticks standing on top of the gallows, standing on top of that trapdoor with a black hood over his face, the hangman's noose around it, and Beaglemeyer standing there, pardon me, what the hell do I do now? Okay, so think about that while I take it. Well, this is probably a good time. You're probably asking yourself, well, just what was this hanging all about? What did Two Sticks do to warrant being executed? So while he's standing there, I'll just tell you about it. It's a long story. It's a long road that got him there. And that road started on November 20th, 1890, when the Army showed up at Pine Ridge and showed up at Rosebud to put down the ghost dancing. Well, as soon as they showed up at Pine Ridge, 4,000 Indians fled down White Creek and went clear to No Waters Village. And at Rosebud, they also fled northwest into the Badlands, went in two different groups. But one of them was Two Strikes, and Two Sticks was a member of Two Strikes band, a large band. And so in time, probably just 3 or 4 days, 3,000 of them ended up on Stronghold Table, if you have any memory or association or ever been there. Wonderful place. And so they go there as a refuge and to seriously ghost dance, because they think now is the time when the Messiah is going to come, going to arrive and save us. And they take the whole Pine Ridge beef herd with them. So they stay there about a month, and they're well fed. And then, but to keep it accurate here, out of the 3,000, people are fading away every now and then. And so by the time December 27th comes, which is about a month later, there's only about 300 real hard, die-hard people there. And I'm suspecting, I have no evidence of this, but I'm suspecting that included Two Sticks and his small little band. Well, on the 27th, they decided that they were going into Pine Ridge and surrender, and they were going to meet Bigfoot there, and as a group, ceremoniously say, "This is all over. We're surrendering." Well, we know what happened, but just to fill it out, the group off the stronghold went as far as across the White River, and then they camped for the night on Grass Creek. And then the next day, the 28th, started off towards Pine Ridge, And when they got to No Waters Village, about half of them just stopped there. They've gone far enough. They stopped at No Waters Village. A few more went as far as Young Man Afraid of His Horses Village, and then a smaller group, pretty small group, went as far as the gates of Drexel Mission, which were closed and locked, and camp on the outside, don't come in. And so then they woke up on the morning of the 29th, and we all know what happens. They heard the gunfire, the cannons going off at Wounded Knee Creek, and they knew what was taking place. And so did all the other people who had filtered back to Pine Ridge. So 4,000, roughly 3,000 or 4,000 Indians, again, all fled down White Clay Creek to No Waters Village. And the army moved in and basically surrounded them and waited them out. And it was a short wait. It's winter. They didn't have much of the beef herd left. Pretty soon it was gone. And so on January 15th, a token group went in and surrendered to General Miles. Well, that sets the stage because there was an important little detail in there. They ate all the beef. They ate all the cattle, all the government herd. They'd consumed it. But the government had a contract to award them 260 cattle every 20 days. There weren't any cattle. So the government, the Indian agents then contracted with area ranchers to supply the cattle. And in June 1892, the Pine Ridge Agency contracted with two very rich ranchers living along Battle Creek, just down from Hermosa, Ed Stinger and what's his name? Why do I forget his name? Anyway, two rich ranchers. And the contract in today's dollars would have been worth $1.5 million to supply a year's worth of beef to the Oglala as per the contract. Well, the first couple times they drove the cattle from their ranch to the Pine Ridge Agency. They did that about twice, maybe three times. And you would know, when you drive cattle 50 miles who have never been over that route, and you have to ford two rivers and cross the Badlands, it doesn't go well. It's a big job. And so they were basically saying, this is costing us money. There's got to be a better way. And so they went to the Indian agent, Brown, who was a crook. And I suspect money passed under the table. And Brown gave them permission to put their cattle on the reservation so they would no longer have to make this long drive. Well, 1,000 cattle? 2,000 cattle? How about 4,000? They moved 4,000 cattle onto the reservation right by No Waters Village, where people are starving. They don't have, Indians are in such bad shape. Measles, whooping cough, tuberculosis are killing them just rampantly. And now you're surrounded by 4,000 of rich white men's cattle eating your grass. And the reason they moved them there was just down from No Waters Village, just up the creek, just a half a mile, was what was called a halfway camp. And when the government had a herd, their government herder lived there. He had a couple horses and he had a corral and he had a pasture, and that was where he stayed. So that was convenient for these Z-Bell ranchers, cowboys, not ranchers, Z-Bell cowboys, to move in and stay. So that's where they were staying, right next to No Waters camp. Well, it wasn't long, and a couple of the cows got butchered. And we all know that the crows and the magpies will tell you where there's a dead animal. So it was quickly discovered. And Underwood, who was kind of the honcho there, wrote into the Pine Ridge Agency and told Brown that a couple of the cows, Humphrey, that was his name, Humphrey, a couple of Humphrey's cows got killed, and he wasn't going to stand for that, and Brown needed to do something about it. So Brown sent out the Indian police. And in those days, you talked to the person, the chief, who was in charge of the whole thing. You told him what the problem was, and it was his job to deal with it. So basically, he just said, this needs to stop, can't happen again. There'll be trouble. And so it did for a while. So now we move into, let me come up with a date here. It would be about January 1893. And lo and behold, 2, 3, 4 more cows are butchered. Again, Underwood goes in, reports to the Indian agent that this happened. So the Indian agent sends out Sergeant Joe Bush and 6 Indian police to deal with it. And they get there, and naturally they talk to No Water, the chief, and tell him, and here I'm just filling in. I think they said something like, whoever butchered those cows, Lieutenant or Captain Brown needs to talk to them. Well, that's code for saying, turn them over and we're going to put them in the jail. And I don't know what's going to happen to them, but they're going to be in jail. And again, I'm just filling in the dots in terms of based on what happened. No Water said, you've got, and again, let me get real clear, I'm just filling in. There's no record of this. But I think No Water would have said, these rich white people are getting rich off of us, 4,000 cattle surrounded by my starving to death people, and you think that we're going to put them in jail for just feeding their family? Go back to Pine Ridge Agency and forget about it. If anything, tell Humphrey to get his damn cattle off of our land. So that's what happened. They had scored a victory. Now, pardon me. I forgot to tell you that when they came back off of the stronghold, Two Sticks and his little clan stopped at No Water's village. So that's where he was. And so they should have recognized this was a victory. Nobody got arrested. Nobody went to jail. We won. But instead, they got incensed that the Indian agent would even try to arrest some of them. So they went into a sweat lodge, and then they ghost danced, and they worked themselves into a frenzy. Now, this is February 2nd, 1893. They worked themselves into a frenzy. And now let me switch sources and go to Philip Wells. He was the boss farmer for the White Clay District and lived just a half mile farther down the creek to No Water's village. And that night, at about midnight, he heard his horses, something was disturbing. Somehow his horses were a little riled or something. So he got up, got dressed, and looked around, didn't say anything, pitched his horses some hay to quiet them down. And it was a nice evening, nice winter evening. If a winter evening can be nice, there was a light cloud layer and light snow falling out of the clouds, and there was no wind. It was just kind of a perfect, beautiful, winter evening. And while he's standing there, a bit trying to figure out, are we going to have a blizzard here, or what's going to happen with the snow, and kind of looking, and he hears a crack. And to him, it sounded a whole lot like a gunshot. But he thought, well, at midnight, a gunshot? Doesn't make any sense. Maybe it's just the ice cracking on White Clay Creek. And he listened for a while and didn't hear anything else. Went back into his cabin. Half hour later, and I'm going to skip a few names, but an Indian family showed up knocking at his door and said, 2 Sticks men just killed 4 white people in the halfway camp. We're scared to death. Let us in and protect us because we know something bad's going to happen. So that sets the scene. And in the morning, Nowater sent a couple of his lieutenants, I'll call them lieutenants, prominent people, prominent, reliable men down. One to stay with Philip Wells's wife, and why Philip Wells, who everybody called the Fox, he was known as the Fox. I could talk for a half hour about him. Tremendous frontiersman. So his job is to go investigate the scene. So he and 4 other people, and I'll throw out a name, Gallows. Oh, I missed the point. Forget that name. So he and a few other people go investigate the scene. And this is quite interesting because in the trial, Wells submitted, he was one of the first people to testify, and he submitted a map of the whole area, 2 Sticks camp, his camp, Nowater's camp, the halfway camp. And then he also submitted a diagram of the dugout. And he said when he got there, he saw the 4 tracks in the snow, and he traced the tracks back to their lodges. And he literally wrote the names of the suspects right on that piece of paper. So anyway, the 4 people are dead. They sent Eagle Louse to Pine Ridge to notify Brown about the murders. Young man afraid of his horses is obviously aware of what's going on. And he goes to Brown and says, let me deal with this. If you try to arrest those perpetrators, there's going to be bloodshed. And the last time there was, it ended up resulting in a Wounded Knee massacre. We don't need that. I will take responsibility, and I promise I will bring in those suspects. And Brown says, you? Huh, I'm in charge of this agency. I and my Indian police, we will deal with it. Get out of the way. So 2 days later, the Indian police show up. And they show up just as the 4 suspects have loaded 2 wagons and a team, and they're probably within 20 minutes of disappearing off into the Badlands. But the Indian police show up, a gunfire breaks out, and 2 Sticks is the first person to be shot. He falls. His son, First Eagle, is enraged. He charges at the Indian police, and I don't know, he maybe made 10 steps and he's shot. Another suspect, White Face Horse, runs to the creek, in the brush in the creek, and somebody shoots, an Indian policeman shoots, and he tumbles into the brush. But the Indian police then the whole tribe gets involved in driving off the Indian police, and so they run for their lives, and probably never would have made it back to the agency except young man afraid of his horse with a bunch of his warriors rode in between the 2 of them. And you didn't shoot that young man afraid of his horses. He was revered. To make this story go shorter, then I will say that eventually, young man afraid of his horses brought in all 4 suspects over time, a few here, a few there, to the agency, and then they were transported to Deadwood, and the other 3 suspects who were alive were tried before before 2 Sticks was tried. They all got a sentence of 5 years. And they pled guilty to manslaughter, got a reduced sentence of 5 years in the state prison, and went off to eventually to prison. But when it came time to try 2 Sticks, the state's attorney wasn't going to settle for that. He wanted a murder charge, and he got the murder charge. And that was quite interesting because the judge gave very detailed instructions to the jurors, and it basically said, if you're going to convict this man of murder, you need to have evidence, you need to be convinced that he was present at the scene, and that even if he didn't kill anybody, that he was material and important role in helping those murders take place. And apparently the jury was so convinced, and so they convicted Two Sticks of murder. Okay, that's the background. That brings us back to the gallows. Well, Bigelmeyer is a big, strong person. He puts his back to it, and he probably would have had to raise that platform up a little bit, get it level, and then he was able to pull it, and with a loud screech, the trapdoor gave way, Two Sticks fell. And they waited a little while, and a physician came up and took Two Sticks' pulse. His heart was still beating. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. It was 10 minutes before his heart stopped beating. And in the meantime, he's twisting and turning, and his legs are coming up, and his shoulders are arching. So it was kind of a gruesome scene. The next day, in the Rapid City Journal, Joseph Gossett, who published the Rapid City Journal at the time, his headline, big, bold headline, was "The Last Good Indian." And so under that, he summarizes the murder and the efforts to capture. It took a long time to bring in Two Sticks, which I skipped over, and the trial. And then the summary was, Two Sticks was the last good Indian to visit Deadwood. Well, that was in the parlance of the time, wasn't it? The only good Indian is a dead Indian. Now, I wanted to put the title on the book, The Last Good Indian. But the editor said, no, that'll never do. We'll come up with a title for you. Well, why did I want to put The Last Good Indian? There were two reasons. One was that, oh, thank you. It's better than throwing something at me. Okay, yeah, I can stand here. So, at that time, 1894, the white people had all the land they wanted. They had the Black Hills. They could be compassionate. And so after 1894, the whole culture changed, and we got rid of that phrase that a good Indian was a dead Indian. Instead, if you read the papers at that time, they were very sympathetic with the plight and blaming the government for the plight of the Indians on the reservations, for the deaths and for the sickness and for the lack of rations and so on. So in that sense, he was the last good Indian. But there's a bigger sense that he was the last good Indian. If you read Philip Wells's wonderful biography, he talked about, among his whole life experiences, he talked about that incident. And he said, I was there, and I saw the tracks in the snow. And he said, after the trial, I examined Two Sticks very carefully. And he didn't know the reason, but he said he had had an earlier injury, and his leg was shriveled up such that he could only walk with one toe on the ground. He said, if he would have been there, I would have seen his tracks. Two Sticks wasn't there. So Two Sticks was right. I was innocent. And let me read you just, if I can here. Probably have to put on glasses to read it. Oh, okay. As Two Sticks said minutes before his execution, the white men will find out in time that I am innocent, and they will be sorry they killed me. And I think I can say, we are sorry. We executed. If innocent means good, we executed an innocent person. That's all I have to say. If you're interested, you can. I have some books. They should sell for about $25 if you went to a retail. All of, 20 is more convenient. So if you want a book, $20, fine.
Well, we usually give people an opportunity to ask any questions, and if anyone does, wait until I bring you the mic.
How did you become interested in this story and learn of it and want to investigate it to bring out the truth? What was the catalyst there?
First of all, I probably have an obsessive compulsive personality disorder. So once you start on something, you just keep going and going and going. And when you get about halfway into it, you really wish you hadn't have started. But since you've invested so much, you think, I've got to keep going to justify all that wasted time. So that's part of it, because writing this was a lot of work, a lot of research, a lot of background. And I only touched on maybe 20% of it in telling this. But I'd earlier written a book called To Have This Land, and it was about the local politics that, in my opinion, laid the groundwork for the Wounded Knee Massacre. And nobody had touched on that. And it was also about the local ranchers along White River who formed the Dakota militia and had, for the month of December, had daily battles back and forth with the young warriors on Stronghold Table, which had never been covered because it wasn't in military records, and all the historians go to military records. Well, the cowboys and ranchers with the Dakota militia knew darn well that they were not following the military's directive, which was to leave the Indians alone if they were on the reservation. So that was and still is a very unknown story. So that started it in that process, and I learned about Two Sticks, and I thought, well, gee, someday I've got to follow up on that. So it's a good question. Thank you.
Any other questions?
It's not really a question. Ooh, that's loud. It's not really a question, but my great-grandfather on my father's side, his name was William Hughes, and he homesteaded at Interior. And he drove cattle from Texas to the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, and he wrote an autobiography. And the part about the Wounded Knee Massacre just brings tears to your eyes because he had several natives that worked with him. I mean, I think about that. They drove like 500 to 1,000 cattle at one time from Texas to Pine Ridge. And he had stated in his autobiography, this will not be a good way of life for generations to come. And he had several natives that worked for him too, but he heard the Battle of Wounded Knee, and he said, it broke my heart. I knew what was happening. And anyway.
His first name was Will, was that right?
William Hughes.
Yeah, I was going to, Will Hughes, okay.
Yeah, did you know him or know of him?
I know his background pretty good.
And then his friend Charlie Stunkel, who came out here from Maryland also.
I didn't know that name.
Well, it takes my dad to tell Charlie Stunkel stories, but it's pretty interesting. They lived in, it was pretty rudimentary. But then my granddad married on the reservation, a woman by the name of Julia, and it's a sweet story. But yeah, that was an interesting time and still is. Still is a lot of politics,
Any other questions? Got another one.
Good, you asked good questions.
I'm nosy. So where was Two Sticks buried? Is he in an unmarked grave, or did he go back? Does people take his body, or what happened?
Did I pay you to ask that question?
I'll take some of your vodka.
When Two Sticks, when they literally cut him down from the hangman's noose, they wheeled him down to the street and just laid him there so passerbys could come look at him that afternoon. And then later, when everybody, the show was done, so to speak, Father Digman and the local Catholic priest took ownership of the body. And there's a St. Ambrose cemetery up in Deadwood Well, they took him up to the St. Ambrose Cemetery. Now, we're to believe that God forgave Two Sticks. The parishioners of the St. Ambrose Church did not. They would not allow Two Sticks to be buried inside their cemetery. So Two Sticks was buried outside the fence of the cemetery in an unmarked grave that is today still unknown, and maybe that's a good way to leave it. Yeah, so he's there someplace, and given the rock there, I went to the cemetery, looked around. Given how rocky it is, he's not buried very deep. Maybe someday they'll wash out or whatever. I hope not, but anyway, that's where he's buried.
Any other questions? Well, thank you very much. Very informative, very interesting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank all of you for coming, and have a great afternoon.